In this video, I will be providing you with some measurements that are very important for anyone who is going to be removing the finished materials from a stairway. So that would include carpeting, tile, and wood to refinish your stairway. So let's go ahead and get started with this first example where all of the materials are the same thickness. So for example, we could have the same size carpet, tile, or wood on the lower and upper floors, along with all of the risers and treads. So in our example here, everything is 3/4 of an inch all the way up to the top. Now, if I remove the top materials and I leave everything like it is, then it will create a lower riser height here. And if I wanted to fix that, I could just remove the rest of the materials on the steps. And at the bottom, if I leave the bottom here, I'm going to end up with a shorter riser height here. However, that can be fixed by removing that material also. And this seems to be a big problem for some of our do-it-yourselfers. So if I leave all of the materials, I'm fine. If I remove some of them, I might not be fine. So anytime I change the thickness of some of these materials, I could create a problem. Or even if I remove some or all of the materials on the stairway, I could still have a problem if the original stairway was built to adjust for any of the variations in thickness of those different materials. And that's one thing you're going to need to keep in mind, because if I have a thicker material at the bottom and a thinner material on the steps, then I'm going to end up with a variation in the risers. They're going to be different sizes. And most building codes will allow a 3/8 of an inch maximum variation, but they usually won't allow a 1 inch difference. So the same thing at the top, and this is probably the most common area you're going to have a problem with on a stairway. It's either going to be at the top or the bottom. And in this example here, we're going to have a 1/2 inch difference between this riser and this riser height. And that probably won't work if the maximum variation in your area is 3/8 of an inch. And the steps and the upper and lower levels can have different size materials than the risers. Here we have a 3/4 inch thick riser along with 1/4 inch thick steps and upper and lower finishing materials. So the thickness of the risers can be different than the thickness of the tread as long as it's consistent throughout the entire stairway. So all 3/4 inch risers, all 1/2 inch risers, all 1/4 inch risers. And the same for the steps. You could have all 1/4 inch thick materials for the steps, all 1/2 inch material, or all 3/4 inch thick material. And you could even have 1/2 inch thick materials for the bottom and 1/4 inch materials for the top, because you're going to have less than a 3/8 of an inch variation in the steps. So I think what I would do if I was going to be refinishing a stairway would be to remove all of the finished materials off of the stairway to expose the original treads and risers, and then measure each one of the risers and the steps to make sure that they're the same size or close to the same size. And then if I wasn't going to remove the finished materials on the lower level or the upper level, then I would just simply do the necessary calculations to see if I could install new materials over the existing stairway, with the understanding that most building codes allow for a 3/8 of an inch variation, and this would include at the bottom or the top. And don't forget, you could always use thicker or thinner materials if you need to make this work. There are a variety of different combinations of materials and construction framing methods you can use to make something like this work. You're just going to have to get creative. Here's another stair building code that can be confusing, but hopefully by the time you're done watching the video, it will not be anymore. And it has to do with the stair treads and risers. And the difference, the maximum allowable difference by most building codes is going to be 3/8 of an inch difference. Now I will put a reference to the building code books, or one of the building code books where I got this from. And remember that not all building departments around the world, these videos are watched all over the world, they are not always going to be the same, but they might be close. So for example, our maximum distance is going to be 3/8 of an inch between the smallest measurement and the largest measurement for treads and risers. In our first example, we have 6 risers. 4 of them are 7 inches. One is 6 7/8, and the other is 7 1/8. And the smallest riser is 6 7/8. The tallest one, 7 1/8. The difference is 1/4 of an inch. A situation like this would be acceptable because the difference between the smallest and the tallest is only 1/4 of an inch. Here's another situation that would also be acceptable. We now have a 7 1/4 inch riser at the top, making it the tallest one. The difference between 6 7/8 and 7 1/4 is 3/8 of an inch, so we're still fine here. However, if we raise this one to 7 3/8 of an inch, we now have a 1/2 inch difference between the smallest and the tallest riser. And this, of course, would be a situation that wouldn't be acceptable to most building departments. Now, the same principle applies to the steps. Maximum difference between the smallest and the largest. In this case here, we have a 1/2 of an inch. Something like this is not going to be acceptable by most building departments. However, a situation like this probably will. So if we take our smallest tread width or depth and the largest, we have 3/8 of an inch difference. So each step can be off a little bit, just as long as the difference between the smallest and the largest is not more than 3/8 of an inch. So I hope that makes sense. Now, the biggest problem for something like this is usually going to occur at the bottom or the top of a stairway or a landing. And that's going to be because someone has added a different sized material to the bottom or the top. For example, you might be remodeling your home, and then you decide to add 3/4 of an inch of tile to the floor. And now you have a 3/4 inch difference between the stair steps. Or you might choose to install treads that are a 1/2 inch thick on the top of your existing steps, creating a problem again at the bottom or the top of the stairway. So most building inspectors check these areas first because they're familiar with that. And now you are also. So hopefully this makes sense. And if it doesn't, maybe watch the video a couple of times, and feel free to leave a question in the comment area if you have something that's a little confusing, and I will answer it as soon as possible.